institutions.
Okay. What is the UN? The UN is, first of all, a place where its members, which is 193 governments, meet. So it is a place where diplomacy can take place. There are 193 UN member states. There's a UN General Assembly. Every September, about 140 world leaders come to the UN. They meet with each other and they give a speech to the UN General Assembly. And it's extremely important that the world has a venue like that. That's one part of what the UN is. Another part of what the UN is an organization to manage that process. So that's what the Secretary General does. And it's called the Secretariat of the UN. A third thing the UN is specialized institutions like the World Health Organization or UNESCO or the UN Development Program or the International Telecommunications Union. There are a couple dozen of these organizations that are very important for global standard setting or setting trade rules or setting even technical standards for how the internet works and so forth. There is the UN Security Council, which is composed of 5 permanent members, the US, China, Russia, UK, and France, and 10 temporary members on a rotating basis, voting basis, with 2-year terms, that's supposed to keep the global peace. Now, does this work? Not very well. It doesn't work very well because it is not empowered to work very well. The world is basically with power at the nation state level. It's a little bit like the European Union. Most of the power, most of the budget, most of the activities are at the level of the member states, not at the level of the Commission, say. But the UN's even much weaker than the EU in this regard because there is no delegation of power from the United States to the UN. So when you say, what has the UN done around sustainable development? Well, the good thing is it helped the 193 governments to establish some purpose and goals and to adopt some shared goals. Then the technical agencies say, well, here's how you could achieve those goals. But is there enforcement of those goals? No. Nobody tells the US what to do, unfortunately. The US doesn't abide by treaties even. It signs treaties. It's about to walk out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Also the WHO, right?
And it just walked out of the WHO. So just to say, if we don't get greenhouse gas emissions under control, would you say, oh, that's the UN failure, UN elitism? Or would you say, the United States doesn't do anything? That's what I would say. So you have to just understand, what do we have? What can we work with? The UN also has almost no money. The money comes from what the member states give it. The budget is absolutely tiny. And the US doesn't even pay on time. So if you ask me about the UN, I've devoted the last 25 years of my life trying to help the UN. We need a global institution. We've got global problems. We don't want nuclear proliferation. We do want nuclear arms control. We do want to control the climate crisis. We do want to be able to control epidemic diseases. We want that.
I think when people hear that, they get a little bit scared about the word control and about global institutions rolling out control.
They should be pretty damn scared about what's happening to our climate. They should be pretty damn scared about diseases like AIDS or malaria running out of control and killing millions of poor people. Yeah, they should be scared about that. And that's what we should be working together to try to solve. We've got real problems on this planet.
These problems that you talked about are specific problems in certain areas.
We hit 1.5 degrees Celsius in 2024. Europe, by the way, is one of the most vulnerable places on the whole planet to climate change. If we push the Earth system just a little bit more, we could have a complete collapse of the way the ocean circulation works, and that would throw Europe into the worst climate crisis in its entire history.
The problem with that is that we've been hearing this for decades.
That's true.
Yeah, but nothing has happened so far.
Not very much has happened.
I'm talking about like the crisis scenario that has been described over decades and decades.
Yeah.
Hasn't come to, how do you say, fruition?
Of course are you kidding? It's come to fruition everywhere.
How? Where?
Los Angeles is burning down.
I don't think that was a climate issue.
Oh, well, thank you.
I think it was a wind issue. And I don't think there was I think that there was problems on the ground. And I wouldn't disagree that we obviously have
I find what you're
climate.
I find what you're saying absurd, by the way, because we see all over the world.
I'm not disagreeing in total.
Excuse me.
You know?
Just let me say, we see all over the world extreme storms, Category 5 hurricanes. We know from the physics, you warm up the Caribbean, you're going to get more Category 5 hurricanes. They're slamming these islands. They are slamming Florida. But that's happening everywhere in the world. I travel all over the world. There are mega droughts. There are mega floods. There are bursts of glacial lakes that are killing people in the high mountain regions. There are mega forest fires all over the world, just as was said, and it's getting worse. So if you say, oh, we've been warned and it's some elite gimmick about being warned, it's sad to hear that, frankly. That's ridiculous. Sorry.
Well, I am sort of voicing opinions that, you know, I've gathered and that I kind of hear, and that's why I want to speak to you about it, because I think this is a great possibility to discuss these issues and the sentiment that I'm getting, I'll just say, by the people, right? And which is why I'm wondering if you've noticed that there is a growing distrust in institutions, and if you think, like, how do you think that came about? Why do you think people aren't, like, let's take me, for example. Why do you think people like me are not taking these scenarios that serious anymore? Because I personally have more distrust in these global institutions than maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Obviously, I was younger then, so maybe there wasn't as much interest. But like, let's take the WHO.
I think I think your distrust is completely misplaced. I would urge you to distrust the U.S. government. It's based on power. It's based on greed. It is a plutocracy. It does very nasty things. If you look at where COVID came from, I'll give you 98%, 99%. It came out of a U.S. laboratory research project, and I know the details of it. Didn't come out of WHO. It came out of University of North Carolina, for God's sake. And they lied about it. So if you want to know where to distrust, distrust centers of power. The UN isn't a center of power. It's a meeting place where centers of power give the finger to the other countries.
But isn't it like that's where a center, okay, it's not a center of power like the United States might be.
That's correct.
But it's where different centers of powers meet to create ideas and to implement ideas that do affect billions of people on the entire planet.
Yeah, but I guess you're missing what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening is that treaties are made and goals are being set, and then the U.S. blows them off.
It's not just the U.S., is it? Or would you say that it's just the U.S. that's blowing them off?
Well, there are 196 countries that are signatories to the Paris Climate Agreement, and one of them just walked out.
Okay, yeah.
One.
You're talking about the United States.
I'm talking about the United States. One of them just walked out. There are 190 countries that are members of WHO or thereabouts. One of them just walked out.
The United States. But let's take the WHO, for example.
No.
You don't think there's any merit to distrusting the WHO?
Let's continue. There is a worldwide sentiment, that there should be a state of Palestine, because that is international law. One country vetoed that. Which one is that?
It's going to be the United States.
That would be the United States, indeed, because it has a veto and it used its veto.
And because it has influence from Israel.
Of course. But my point is that if you want to understand what's going on, understand power.
I would just argue that these institutions also have power. They might have limited power, but the WHO has power. It had ideas. It had ideas. Okay, then I might very well be wrong, but it had ideas about how to curb the pandemic that we saw between 2020 and 2023. And so I would argue that, let's take the WHO, that I do understand why people distrust a global organization that has ideas on how to fight a pandemic, and then the nation states implement these rules, even though they might not even make sense in that particular country.
By the way, they don't. Sad to say, it has no power.
Okay.
Sad to say.
Well, I mean, honestly, I find that it's easing me. It's like, it's kind of relaxing.
No, but it's, but you're missing the point.
Okay, it might be.
Where is the power? The power is with powerful countries. And the most powerful country is the United States. And it does what it wants. And when it doesn't like a treaty, it just walks out of the treaty. Or it doesn't sign the treaty.
But isn't that the right of any sovereign state to, if they don't want to adhere to a treaty, to kind of remove itself from a treaty?
It's right, and it's a stupidity if we're, we have.
Well, it might be wrong. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying,
I'm telling you it's wrong.
Okay.
Because the United States is completely irresponsible. So that's the problem. That's what we're after.
So I know that you favor multilateralism, which makes sense. Multilateralism, right? That's what I would call it, at least. So you're an advocate for multilateralism for the future. So how do you think that would look like in a world where we have the United States that's removing itself from all these treaties? Then we have these new power centers that are rising, at least from what I can tell, like China and Russia, just to name two of them. India, a little further back, but it's still there. So how do you think what's that going to look like? I mean, is multilateralism even possible when you have like this competition between these nation states that are obviously more powerful than a lot of the other countries that are also represented in the UN?
Why should countries sign treaties? Well, they could say, and in fact, Donald Trump does, I don't want to sign treaties. I want to have my freedom of action. But the reason you sign a treaty is you say, I'd like you to do something. You'd like me to do something. So we agree in a treaty. That's a basic function of living together on the planet. So I'm not very happy that the United States slams the door, walks out, abrogates treaties, refuses to sign treaties. If you ask me, does multipolarity, meaning several places that have power, undermine multilateralism, I would say quite the contrary. Multipolarity makes multilateralism crucial. What does multilateralism mean? It means, or what I would say it should mean, is that powerful countries agree to abide by shared rules. They agree to live under an international rule of law. They don't just say, it's a jungle, we do what we want, we leave when we want, we have the right, because we're sovereign, to do anything we want, but rather to say, we're going to live together, not blow up the planet, address environmental crises, and do other things that we need to do because it's in our mutual benefit. To me, that's what being a grown-up is. You don't say, I don't like law. That's terrible. I want freedom. I want to do what we want. So I don't have to obey anything. I just want to do what I want. I'm a free person. I'm not going to obey any law. You'd say someone like that is a little nuts, and they'd be arrested and so forth. Well, why do we have those laws? Why don't we just let people do what they want? Because it doesn't work very well when people just do what they want. But Donald Trump thinks countries should just do what they want. He has the idea we're sovereign, we're free, we do what we want. I don't want international law. We're the United States of America. Well, how good is that? How's that going to work out? Is that going to work out great for the world? I don't think so. So this is the real issue, not the UN. My God, the UN is where the United States says, go to hell. It's not where we get actual decision-making that is enforced. There is no enforcement right now. That's a problem. I want a stronger institution, not the weak one that we have right now, because I actually believe it's okay to have stop signs and street lights, which is an infringement on the freedom to cross the street when you want, because if you don't have those, we end up with a lot of people dead. Well, I want that at the global level too.
What would that look like to you to have enforcement on a global level?
It would mean that when you have a UN Security Council treaty, you take it seriously. It would mean that if in February 17, 2015, when the UN Security Council voted for the Minsk II agreement, by unanimous vote, that Chancellor Merkel would say, this is real, this is serious, and we're the guarantor. That's what it would mean. What would the enforcement mean? The enforcement might mean, first of all, that there would be a norm of responsibility. So there would be accountability. We would have every year a systematic process. Are you abiding by the treaty? Are you not abiding by the treaty? Just having an honest process, having an independent scrutiny. We don't even have that because rich countries, especially the United States, does not want anyone looking over its shoulder. It's sovereign. We do what we want. No one's going to tell us what to do. Well, that would be the first thing. By the way, I testified in the UN Security Council a couple of years ago saying we needed an independent investigation of Nord Stream. Nord Stream was blown up. I think the overwhelming evidence is the United States blew it up. It promised to do so, with Chancellor Scholz standing by the side of President Biden when he promised to end it on February 7th, 2022, in a White House press conference. And then it was blown up. And I said, well, why don't we investigate? Oh, the United States said, no way, that's completely inappropriate. Why should we have an investigation? Germany's going to investigate. Denmark's going to investigate. Sweden's going to investigate. I said, well, maybe NATO won't investigate itself very well. Maybe we need an independent UN investigation. Mr. Sachs, you're completely out of line. Well, do you blame the UN that we don't quite know what happened? Or would you blame the United States and your German government?
I blame Germany.
Yeah, I would too. Because Chancellor Scholz knows what happened.
I think it's embarrassing. Oh, you think he knows?
Of course he knows.
Mm-hmm.
How could he not know? Of course he knows. Everybody knows, by the way. Because President Biden said it, and so did so many other U.S. officials over the years. They said, we don't like this pipeline. We don't want Germany and Russia binding together. We don't. In
Germany, they say it's a conspiracy, if you think that way, because they have different theories about it. So.
It is a conspiracy. The United States conspired to blow up the pipeline. That's what a conspiracy is. And then they lied about it. And of course, Chancellor Scholz knows about it. And by the way, if he doesn't know about it, and he was standing there when Joe Biden promised that he would end the pipeline and that, quote, the U.S., we have our ways, I would hope the Chancellor would ask the U.S., well, what did happen?
Mm-hmm. Maybe they did in certain, backroom talks.
Oh, maybe in back rooms,
do you think
but,
so?
I think, yeah, I think they know.
Do you know if people are chatting about Nord Stream, and are they talking about Germany, that it's embarrassing that we aren't even trying to figure out who did it?
Well, I'm talking,
I'm just trying to get the inside scoop now.
I'll give you the good news and the bad news. Your chancellor knows who did it, but he's not talking. Okay? So that's my view.
Mm-hmm. On Nord Stream.
And my view in general is we should be responsible grown-ups. If something like that happens, maybe the chancellor says, I really don't know. And then I would say to him, don't you think you should find out? That's what I would respond. Because that's very serious what happened. That toppled the German economy. So it's worth finding out what happened.
I'd agree. I agree with that. It's
well,
definitely worth finding. I'm glad we have common ground on that. I definitely agree with that. So let me ask you this. You've voiced strong criticism about the deep state in the United States being arrogant, about certain political elites being, making not so smart decisions. I'll put it that way. So that begs the question, to me at least, with these powerful people that are shaping global policy, can normal people like me, can we trust them?
No. No, of course not. We need accountable institutions.
How would we trust them? See, this is the thing. Like, I wonder how to trust them. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
The reason we don't have accountability is that we have governments that run on secrecy, like blowing up Nord Stream. And we have governments that run on secrecy because we have built into our laws and our institutions secrecy. This started in the United States, especially in 1947, in the National Security Act. And the biggest culprit of all is the CIA. And the CIA is a secret army. We know that. It topples governments, it destabilizes governments, it assassinates people. We shouldn't have such secrecy. I think it's, by the way, a massively failed institution. I've studied it for more than 40 years. It makes terrible, terrible judgments and terrible, terrible mistakes. But you know what? Doesn't matter. There's no report card. There's no accountability. There's no scorecard. They just deny. We didn't do that. We had nothing to do with that. Us? Why would you say us when it's obvious? Okay, this is the problem. How can we trust when there's no accountability? So we need to clean up our institutions. Doesn't mean that anarchy is the answer. It doesn't mean we don't need government. It doesn't mean we don't need a UN. We need to make these institutions work. So we need to understand what's wrong with them. Why are they dysfunctional? What's happening? How can they be fixed? This year, 2025, is the 50th anniversary of the only time in America that the CIA was scrutinized. That was 1975 in a congressional process in the U.S. Senate called the Church Committee, because Senator Frank Church of Idaho presided. They uncovered crime after crime after crime of the CIA. Assassinations, surveillance, by the way, grabbing people out of Times Square, giving them drugs without them knowing it, people committing suicide, jumping out of windows. MK Ultra was the name of that particular program. That was all uncovered the one time the CIA was scrutinized. It was scrutinized because of a weird set of events. We had the Watergate scandal, and so President Nixon had resigned, and President Gerald Ford was not elected by the public, so he was quite weak. He couldn't resist the Senate investigation at the time. And the CIA had changed hands. So there was a moment when we could look under the covers. It was horrifying. That was 50 years ago. There has been no public hearings for 50 years. Now, President Trump just said he's going to release the files on the 2 Kennedy assassinations and the Martin Luther King assassination. Well, if he does this is a breakthrough that we've waited more than 60 years for in the case of the JFK assassination. We need accountability, not the secrecy. If you say, can we trust these institutions? Absolutely not. What's the right response? Understand them. Try to understand what they're doing. You won't find it in the mainstream media, so you better look around. When you're attacked as a conspiracy theorist, you better understand that unaccountable institutions operate by conspiracies. That doesn't mean every conspiracy theory is true, but it doesn't mean that there are no conspiracies. Of course there are. That's what secrecy is, to do things that are secret or deniable, that are otherwise rampantly against the law. That's the business of that organization. I don't like it. I don't think a democratic country should have an organization like that.
Mm-hmm. So you just mentioned the opening up of the files, releasing the files of the assassinations. That's one thing that he signed by presidential decree. Is that what it's called?
Exactly.
And Trump also promised during his campaign that he would shut down the Ukraine war. He would figure it out within, I don't know, a couple of days.
You said an hour, maybe. Or
Yeah,
one day.
something like that. So it's already been an hour.
Yeah.
I don't think it's been figured out yet. So where do you think this is going with Trump as president? I understand that way back when you supported Bernie Sanders, so obviously you're not going to you're not going to support him on domestic policies or international policies, but maybe on those issues. Where do you think the United States is going? What is your assessment?
Well, let me just explain one thing, especially for also German listeners. The guy comes into office at noon on January 20th, 2025, and suddenly spends the day signing orders. One person, no laws, no congressional oversight. He just signs orders. It's a little strange. And some of these are really consequential orders, like withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement or withdrawing from the World Health Organization, choosing whether or not to raise tariffs and so forth. How does he do that? Well, turns out all through U.S. law are emergency clauses. And emergency clauses say, I declare an emergency. I declare an emergency on the southern border. I declare an emergency here. All he has to do is declare an emergency, and then it's one-person rule. Well, this is a big problem with America, period. Whether what he's doing is right or wrong, it's shocking to me to watch one person signing these decrees, one after another, calling something an emergency. Oh, all right. Call me a little naive. We had a revolution in 1776 because we didn't like King George III signing decrees one after another without any say of the American colonies. I don't like a president being able to invoke emergencies as he calls them and then making major decisions as an individual. Okay, that I just want to explain why that's so weird. What will he actually do? You never know with Donald Trump. But he could and should end the war in Ukraine because it's just about the most misguided, stupid venture that America's been in, although it's hard to say because Iraq was a stupid venture, Syria was a stupid venture, Libya was a stupid venture, Afghanistan was a stupid venture, Vietnam was a stupid venture. So, there have been a lot of them, but the Ukraine war was, as we discussed, a completely unnecessary, avoidable war. He could end it. What he has to do is what Joe Biden either couldn't do because he wasn't all there or didn't want to do, and that is pick up the phone and talk to his counterpart, President Putin, and say, NATO is not going to enlarge to Ukraine, and that will end the war.
So you think it's that simple, and that would make peace possible?
It's going to happen, actually. I don't really know why they need 100 days, by the way, but it's going to happen. That one I'm pretty confident about.
Really?
Yes.
That's interesting because when I spoke to Mearsheimer a couple of months ago, he was like, I don't know, because of the deep state, the foreign policy establishment that's so strong in the United States.
That's correct. What's happening right now is everyone's running up to Trump. You can't do that. You can't do that. We'll lose reputation here. We'll lose reputation there. You must stand strong. We must defend. All the normal reasons for continuing killing Ukrainians, because probably 1 million are dead or seriously wounded by now. Yes, they're trotting out all those arguments, but I don't think Trump's going to listen because Trump basically is, I think, very unlikely to go back to the U.S. Congress and say, I want another $50 billion for Ukraine. I don't see how he could possibly do that. The American people are disgusted by all of this. The budget is without money. We have huge budget deficits. The war makes no sense. People have come to understand that the whole thing was concocted in a crazy kind of way. So I'm pretty optimistic, actually, he's going to end the war.
Mm-hmm. I would say that would probably be a positive thing.
Hugely positive.
Okay.
I say, let him win 3 Nobel Peace Prizes. I want him to win one for ending the Ukraine war. I want him to recognize the state of Palestine and end the endless wars in the Middle East. And I want him to make an agreement with China. You don't bother us and we won't bother you. And the world will feel a lot safer. So within 1 year, if he does the right thing, the world could be much, much safer than it is right now. And I would hope that the European politicians would stop running around in a tizzy and a panic saying we have to spend 5% of GNP on military, which is crazy. And by the way, Trump is pushing that to sell U.S. weapon systems. Okay, he's a salesman. So I hope that Europeans could calm down, understand the end of the war would be the best thing for European security, rebuild the Nord Stream pipeline, by the way, get the German economy started again, and everybody could calm down a bit.
So this is perfect, because this way we can end on a positive note. You say peace is possible. He could shut it down. He could even make the world more peaceful with doing the 3 things that you just said, which would be beautiful. I think most people would be like, yes, please, let us breathe. Let us have a moment of peace. Let us worry about other issues that you have mentioned in our interview. So, Mr. Sachs, thank you so much for entertaining.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for entertaining my questions and explaining your point of view.
No,
to me and my audience.
Thank you for tolerating me as I did. So I really appreciated it.
Thank you so
much. Enjoyed
much.
talking to you.
Thank you.